No woman ever survived the Alpha King, they had warned Emily Carter. Yet when dawn slipped through the tall windows of Blackwood Palace, pale and silver beneath a storm-heavy sky, she was asleep with her cheek resting over his heart. The first servant to enter stopped so suddenly that the tray in her hands rattled. Steam curled from the porcelain cup, carrying the faint scent of chamomile into a room that had smelled of cold stone and rain for years. She stared at the bed as if the moon itself had fallen through the roof. Emily lay beneath a dark wool blanket, one hand tucked beneath her face, her breathing slow and even. Beside her, King Adrian Blackwood had not moved. He sat against the carved headboard, broad shoulders rigid beneath a black linen shirt, his silver-gray eyes fixed on the doorway. One arm curved around Emily without touching her, held just above her as though he feared even the warmth of his hand might disturb her sleep. Outside, thunder rolled beyond the palace walls. Emily did not flinch. That was what made the servant's face drain of color. Everyone in Blackwood Palace knew the stories. They whispered them in kitchens, in the guard corridors, in the narrow servants' rooms where candlelight made every shadow seem alive. Women had been sent to the king's chambers before. Some had come willingly, hoping to win a crown. Some had come because their families owed favors to the court. Some had been told that a single night near the king might bring honor, gold, protection. By sunrise, none had remained. No one spoke of what happened after the doors closed. They only lowered their voices and said the same thing. The king was cursed, and the curse did not spare anyone who came too close. But Emily had slept. Peacefully, like a child beside a fireplace on a winter evening. Like the storm beyond the glass had no power to reach her. The servant swallowed hard. "Your Majesty," she whispered. Adrian's gaze sharpened. Quiet. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The words settled into the room with the weight of an iron lock. The servant lowered her eyes at once. Adrian looked down at Emily again. A loose strand of chestnut hair had fallen across her cheek. He watched it rise and fall with every breath she took, and something unfamiliar moved through the hard line of his face. Not relief. Relief was too small a word for it. For years, Adrian had learned to measure every night by what he might lose to the darkness inside him. He had learned to sleep alone, to keep the doors barred, to make his palace cold enough that no one would mistake it for a home. Yet Emily had entered his world less than a day ago, carrying nothing but a small cloth bag and eyes too tired for someone so young. She had looked at him once, really looked at him, and instead of seeing the monster everyone described, she had seen a man who had not rested in a very long time. Now her heartbeat tapped softly against his chest. Steady, warm, alive, and for the first time in years, the darkness beneath his ribs had gone still. Emily woke to the sound of rain tapping softly against the palace windows. For a few seconds, she did not know where she was. The blanket beneath her fingers was heavier than any she had ever owned, warm and smooth, and the air carried the clean scent of cedar smoke, rainwater, and something colder beneath it, like snow resting on pine branches. Then she felt the slow, steady rise beneath her cheek. A heartbeat. Her eyes opened. King Adrian Blackwood sat beside her in the gray morning light, silent as the stone walls around him. His silver-gray eyes were already watching her. Emily drew in a breath and pushed herself upright too quickly. The room tilted for a moment. Her hand went to the edge of the mattress, and Adrian moved at once, not toward her, but away. He gave her space as if space were the only kindness he knew how to offer. "You are safe," he said. His voice was low, roughened by a night without sleep. Emily looked around the room. The fire had burned down to a bed of orange embers. A cup of tea rested untouched on a small table near the door. Beyond the windows, the palace grounds disappeared into sheets of rain. She remembered the corridor, the frightened servants, the old woman who had pressed a wool cloak into her hands and whispered that she should not answer if the king called her name after midnight. She remembered Adrian standing in the shadows near the fireplace, his face pale with exhaustion, telling her to take the bed while he remained by the window. She remembered the storm growing louder. Then nothing. "I fell asleep," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." He did not sound angry. That surprised her more than anything. "I am sorry." Adrian's expression changed so slightly that she almost missed it. His brows drew together, and for one brief second, the king looked less like a legend and more like a man who had forgotten how to respond to gentleness. "You do not need to apologize for sleeping," he said. Emily lowered her gaze. In her old home, apologies had become as familiar as breathing. She apologized for taking up space at the table, for speaking too quietly, for speaking at all. She had apologized when her stepfather decided her presence brought bad luck to the house, and again when the pack elders offered her name to the royal court in exchange for settling debts that were never hers. She had been told that serving the Alpha King was an honor. No one had looked at her long enough to make the lie convincing. A knock sounded at the door. Adrian's entire body went still. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen, though the morning had grown brighter. "Enter," he said. The door opened only a few inches. A woman in a dark gray uniform stepped inside with her eyes lowered. She was older than Emily, perhaps in her 40s, with silver strands woven through her dark hair. "Your Majesty, the council has arrived," she said carefully. "They are asking whether the girl is—" Her voice faded. Adrian looked toward Emily. The silence that followed was not empty. It pressed against the walls. Emily understood what the woman could not bring herself to say. They were asking whether she was still alive. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. Adrian stood. He was tall enough that the morning light caught across his shoulders, turning the scar at his jaw into a pale line. "Tell the council," he said, each word calm and precise, "that Emily Carter will join us for breakfast when she is ready." The woman finally looked up. Her eyes widened. Adrian did not look away. "And tell them," he added, "that no one enters this room without her permission." Breakfast was served in a sunroom overlooking the eastern gardens, though there was little sun to speak of. Rain silvered the glass ceiling and ran in thin streams down the tall windows, blurring the hedges, fountains, and black iron gates beyond them. Emily sat at one end of a table, so long it seemed built for people who preferred distance. A plate of warm biscuits, sliced pears, and eggs rested before her, untouched. Across from her, King Adrian stood near the window with one hand braced against the stone frame. He had not sat down. He had barely looked at the food. The woman from earlier, whose name Emily had learned was Mrs. Holloway, moved quietly around the room, pouring tea with careful hands. Every few seconds, her eyes flickered toward Emily as if she expected the girl to vanish. Emily tried to hold her cup without trembling. It was not the king who made her nervous now. It was the silence around him. The servants spoke in whispers. The guards outside the door had gone stiff when she passed. Even the polished silverware seemed too bright, too fragile, as though the entire palace had been waiting for her to break some rule she did not know existed. "You should eat," Adrian said at last. Emily glanced up. His voice was gentler than it had been in the bedroom, but it still carried the quiet command of someone who had spent his life being obeyed. "I am not very hungry," she admitted. "You have not eaten since yesterday afternoon." Emily blinked. She had not told him that. Before she could ask how he knew, he looked away, toward the rain. "Mrs. Holloway told me." The housekeeper gave a small nod from beside the tea tray. "You arrived with one bag and no supper," she said. "That is not how guests are received in this palace." Emily almost smiled at the word guests. No one had called her that when the carriage took her from her village. The royal escort had spoken about her, as if she were a sealed letter being delivered to a dangerous address. She picked up a biscuit and broke it in half. The warmth against her fingertips steadied something inside her. "Why did they send me here?" she asked. The question came out before she could stop it. Adrian turned slowly. Rain tapped against the glass above them. "Your pack owes taxes to the crown," he said. "Your stepfather offered service in place of payment." Emily stared at the small piece of bread in her hand. The words did not hurt in the way she expected. They landed with an old, familiar weight. Her stepfather had always found a way to make her feel like an expense. A chair at the table, a dress that needed mending, a daughter who had never shifted, never brought honor, never became useful enough to keep. "Did you ask for me?" she said. Adrian's jaw tightened. "No," the answer was immediate. "I did not know your name until last night." Emily looked at him then. There was no softness in his face, but there was something close to anger beneath it. Not anger at her. Anger held tightly behind his ribs. "I told the council years ago that no one was to be sent to my chambers," he continued. "They chose not to listen." The room seemed to grow colder. Mrs. Holloway lowered her eyes. Emily remembered the old woman's warning in the corridor, the fear hidden beneath every careful word. Why would they disobey you? She asked. Adrian's silver-gray gaze met hers. For a moment, the king looked tired enough to be human. Because frightened people are easier to control when they believe the monster is sitting on the throne. Before Emily could answer, a sharp knock cut through the room. One of the guards opened the door and bowed. Your Majesty, he said, Lord Harrow insists on speaking with you. He says the council cannot wait. Adrian's expression went still. Then he looked at Emily, not as a burden, not as a sacrifice, but as if her answer mattered. Would you like to stay here? He asked quietly. Or would you like to hear what they have been saying about you? Emily looked from the guard to the king, then down at the rain trembling on the window panes. Every sensible part of her wanted to stay in the sunroom, where the tea was warm and Mrs. Holloway's quiet presence made the palace feel less enormous. She had spent most of her life learning how to avoid rooms where powerful people were deciding her future. But something in Adrian's question held her still. He had not ordered her to come. He had asked. No one had asked Emily what she wanted in a very long time. I would like to hear, she said. The guard's eyes shifted toward her, surprised, but Adrian only nodded once. He crossed the room and stopped a few feet away from her chair. You do not have to speak, he said. You do not have to defend yourself. If you want to leave, you tell Mrs. Holloway, and she will take you anywhere in this palace. Emily searched his face. The scars along his jaw and temple made him look severe, but his eyes were different now. They were not cold. They were watchful, as if he had built a wall around every dangerous thing in the world and was waiting to see whether it would reach her anyway. All right, she said. The council chamber was on the second floor, beyond a long corridor lined with portraits of former kings. Emily walked beside Adrian, not close enough to touch him, but close enough to feel the strange quiet that followed him. Guards bowed as they passed. Servants stepped aside. No one met her eyes for more than a second. Her borrowed dress, soft blue and plain at the collar, brushed against her ankles as she walked. It had belonged to one of the palace seamstresses, Mrs. Holloway had explained. Emily had thanked her 3 times. The seamstress had looked as though no one had thanked her in years. At the end of the corridor, 2 carved oak doors stood open. Voices spilled through them, low but sharp. This is precisely why we must act quickly, a man was saying. The girl is an unknown variable. Adrian's hand lifted slightly, stopping Emily before she entered. He did not touch her. He simply looked down at her. You may hear things that are unkind, he said. They are not true. Emily felt something tighten in her throat. She had heard unkind things before. They usually came dressed as facts. Too weak, too quiet, too little wolf in her blood. She nodded anyway. Adrian pushed the doors open. The council chamber smelled of old paper, wood polish, and damp wool. 6 people sat around a long table beneath a painted ceiling of wolves running beneath a full moon. At the head of the table stood Lord Harrow, a narrow man with silver hair and a dark green coat buttoned to his throat. His eyes landed on Emily, then widened. The room fell silent. She is awake, he said. It was not a greeting. It was an accusation. Adrian walked to the head of the table, but he did not sit. Emily Carter is here because I invited her, he said. Lord Harrow's mouth tightened. Your Majesty, with respect, the court requires discretion. The palace is already full of rumors. Then perhaps the court should stop feeding them, Adrian replied. A woman near the window folded her hands over a stack of papers. No one intended harm, she said carefully. The girl was sent as a companion, nothing more. Emily felt the words settle over her skin like dust. A companion, a softer word for something no one expected to return. Adrian's gaze moved to the woman. The air in the room changed. Even the rain seemed quieter. She was sent without my consent, he said. She arrived hungry, frightened, and alone. Do not insult her by calling that kindness. Lord Harrow leaned forward. The kingdom is unstable. People need reassurance that your condition has not worsened. Adrian's expression did not change. My condition is not the kingdom's greatest danger. His eyes turned toward Emily for one brief moment. The people who use fear to make decisions are. Then Lord Harrow placed a sealed document on the table. There is another matter, he said. A message arrived from Emily Carter's pack before dawn. Emily stared at the seal pressed into the wax. She knew that symbol. It belonged to her stepfather. And suddenly, the warm biscuit in her stomach felt like a stone. Emily knew the seal before Lord Harrow turned the document over. A crescent moon wrapped around a thorn branch, pressed into dark blue wax. Her stepfather had used it on every notice that arrived at the cottage, every list of chores, every warning that she was expected to be grateful for a roof over her head. Her fingers went cold in her lap. Lord Harrow broke the seal with a small silver knife and unfolded the paper. The sound of it opening seemed too loud in the council chamber. Adrian watched Emily, not the letter. That was the first thing she noticed. He did not reach for it. He did not demand to know what it said. He simply stood beside her chair, silent and still, as though he understood that some words could make a room feel smaller. Lord Harrow cleared his throat. "It is a request from the Carter pack," he said. "They ask that Emily be returned immediately." Emily's breath caught. For one strange moment, she saw the old cottage as clearly as if she were standing inside it. The cracked blue bowl near the stove. The thin curtains that never kept out the winter wind. The narrow bed beneath the attic window where rain had leaked through the roof every spring. She remembered waking before sunrise to carry water from the pump, even when frost covered the ground. She remembered her stepfather calling her Emily only when someone else was listening. Most days, he called her girl. "Why?" she asked. Her voice sounded far away. Lord Harrow's eyes moved over the letter. "Your stepfather claims you were sent to the palace temporarily to fulfill a service agreement. He says your absence has caused hardship in the household." A small, bitter laugh almost escaped her, but Emily pressed her lips together. Hardship. The word was so polished it barely resembled the truth. She had cooked their meals, mended their clothes, cleaned the pack house after gatherings, and sat through every cold season with less food on her plate than anyone else. Her absence had not caused hardship. It had caused inconvenience. The woman near the window spoke again. "The council should consider the request. If she returns, the matter can be handled quietly." Adrian turned his head. He did not raise his voice. "Quietly for whom?" The woman's face tightened. "For the kingdom, Your Majesty." "No," Adrian said. "For the people who believe they could trade a young woman's safety for a debt payment." The room went still. Lord Harrow folded the letter with deliberate care. "There is also the matter of the agreement. The Carter pack expects compensation if Emily remains here." Emily looked up. "Compensation?" The word came out thin. Lord Harrow met her eyes at last. "Your stepfather says he surrendered valuable labor. He requests payment in grain, winter coal, and royal protection for the next 3 years." Emily felt heat rise into her face. Not because she was ashamed of being poor. She had lived with poverty long enough to know it was not a crime. She was ashamed because some part of her had hoped that, after one night away, someone at home might have wondered whether she was all right. Instead, her stepfather had counted what she was worth. Adrian's hand rested on the back of the chair beside her. It was close enough for her to see the faint scars across his knuckles, but he did not touch her. "Emily," he said quietly, "do you want to return?" Every person in the room looked at her. The painted wolves above the council table seemed to race through moonlight without making a sound. Emily thought of the old cottage. She thought of the carriage that had taken her away. She thought of waking that morning without fear pressing against her chest before she had even opened her eyes. Her throat tightened, but she lifted her chin. "No," she said. The word was soft. It was also the strongest thing she had ever said. Adrian looked toward Lord Harrow. "Then there is no request to consider." Lord Harrow's expression hardened. "Your Majesty, the girl may not understand the consequences." Emily's hands trembled beneath the table, but she did not lower her gaze. "I understand," she said. "I have been living with them my whole life." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Adrian reached for the letter, held it over the candle burning at the center of the table, and let the edge catch fire. The blue wax curled first. Then the paper darkened, folded in on itself, and became ash in a shallow brass dish. Emily watched it disappear, and somewhere beneath the fear, something small and unfamiliar began to breathe. It felt almost like freedom. The council chamber emptied slowly after that, though no one seemed willing to be the first to turn their back on the king. Chairs scraped across the floor. Papers were gathered with stiff hands. Lord Harrow left last, his dark green coat disappearing through the oak doors without a word. Emily remained seated until the room was quiet enough for her to hear the rain again. It tapped against the high windows in a soft, steady rhythm, as if the storm had been waiting outside all along. The ashes from her stepfather's letter rested in the brass dish at the center of the table. She stared at them until the shapes blurred. Adrian stood a few feet away, his shoulders tense beneath his black coat. He had protected her in front of the council, but he did not look pleased with himself. He looked like a man bracing for another door to open. "You did not have to burn it," Emily said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried in the empty chamber. Adrian turned toward her. "Yes, I did. It was proof of what he wanted. It was proof of what he thought he could take." Emily lowered her eyes. She did not know what to say to that. In her old home, people took things from her so often that she had stopped naming each loss. Time, food, rest, a place by the fire, the right to say no. She had learned to make herself smaller around other people's needs. But Adrian had looked at a single letter and seen something she had never been allowed to call wrong. Mrs. Holloway appeared quietly at the doorway. "Miss Carter," she said, "I have prepared a room for you in the East Wing. It has a view of the gardens." Emily looked at Adrian. "Am I staying?" The question slipped out before she could hide it. His expression softened in a way that made her chest ache. "Only if you choose to," he said. "You are not a prisoner here." Mrs. Holloway led Emily through the palace corridors while Adrian remained behind. The East Wing was warmer than the room she had seen that morning. The walls were painted a soft cream, and the lamps gave off a golden glow instead of the cold blue light that seemed to follow the king. Her new room had a small fireplace, a bed piled with quilts, and a window seat overlooking the rain-soaked gardens. On the dresser sat a folded stack of clothes in shades of blue, green, and gray. Emily touched the sleeve of the nearest dress with 2 fingers. The fabric was fine, but not flashy. Someone had chosen things she could move in. Things that felt like they belonged to a person, not a display. "Mrs. Holloway," Emily said, "why is everyone afraid of him?" The older woman paused beside the door. Her face changed, not with fear exactly, but with sadness that had been carried for too long. "Because fear is easier than understanding," she said. "The king has been ill for many years. There are nights when the curse takes hold and the palace feels it from the basement to the roof." Emily thought of Adrian standing by the window while she slept. The exhaustion in his eyes. The careful distance he kept between them. Has he ever hurt anyone? Mrs. Holloway looked at her for a long moment. "He has spent years making sure he never does." The answer settled into Emily's heart with unexpected weight. After Mrs. Holloway left, Emily stood by the window and watched the rain soften the edges of the gardens. Far below, a young stable boy struggled to pull a cart through the mud. One wheel had caught in a rut near the side gate. 2 guards walked past without noticing. Emily did not think. She simply grabbed the plain wool shawl from the chair and hurried downstairs. By the time she reached the courtyard, rain had darkened the loose strands of her hair and soaked the shoulders of her dress. The boy looked up in surprise as she pushed beside him. "You do not have to help," he said. "I know," Emily replied, bracing her hands against the wooden cart. "But I can." Together, they freed the wheel from the mud. The boy smiled, small and uncertain. From the covered archway across the courtyard, Adrian watched them in silence. Rain gathered along the edge of his dark hair, but he did not move. He only watched Emily kneel beside the boy, wipe mud from her palms, and ask if he had eaten breakfast. And for the first time since she arrived, the king understood that her kindness was not weakness. It was the bravest thing he had ever seen. By late afternoon, the rain had thinned to a silver mist, leaving the palace courtyard washed clean and shining beneath the clouds. Emily sat on the low stone wall near the stable, sharing the last of her biscuit with the boy whose cart she had helped free from the mud. His name was Noah, and he could not have been more than 10 years old. He held the biscuit in both hands as if it were something rare. "You should keep it," he told her. "You probably have not eaten much either." Emily smiled. "I had breakfast." Noah looked toward the palace windows. "In there?" His eyes widened. "With the king?" Emily followed his gaze. The upper windows reflected the gray sky, giving no sign of the man who had watched her from the archway. "Yes," she said. Noah lowered his voice. "Is he scary?" The question was innocent, but it carried the same fear Emily had heard in every whisper since arriving. She thought of Adrian standing beside her chair in the council chamber. She thought of the way he had asked whether she wanted to return home. She thought of the space he always left between them, as if he believed she might need it to breathe. "I think he is lonely," Emily said. Noah frowned, considering this. "Can kings be lonely?" "I think anyone can." A bell rang from the palace tower, deep and slow. Noah jumped to his feet. That means the evening meal is ready. He brushed crumbs from his coat. Thank you, Miss Emily. Before she could answer, he ran toward the stable, his boots splashing through shallow puddles. Emily watched him go, then pulled her shawl closer around her shoulders. The air had turned cold. She had almost reached the covered walkway when she heard voices behind her. There she is. Emily stopped. Two women stood near the fountain, both dressed in fine traveling cloaks. One had dark blonde hair pinned beneath a velvet hat. The other wore a pearl clasp at her throat. Their faces were polite in the way sharp knives were polished. You are Emily Carter, the woman with the pearls said. Emily nodded. Yes. I am Lady Beatrice Harrow. This is Lady Miriam Vale. We came to see whether the palace rumors were true. Emily's fingers tightened around her shawl. What rumors? Lady Miriam smiled without warmth. That the king has decided to keep you. The word keep made Emily's stomach turn. The king has not decided anything for me, she said. Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed slightly. How noble of you to say. Still, you must understand how this appears. A girl from a minor pack arrives with no title, no training, no connection to the court. By morning, she is eating in the king's private rooms. Emily felt heat climb into her cheeks, but she did not step back. I did not ask to be sent here. Of course not, Lady Miriam said. Girls like you rarely ask. They simply learn to take advantage of whatever door opens. The words landed hard. Emily had heard them in different forms all her life. You should be grateful. You should know your place. You should not want more than you have been given. For a moment, she wanted to disappear into the mist, to become small enough that no one could see her. Then she remembered Adrian asking her what she wanted. She remembered the letter turning to ash. I am not taking advantage of anything, Emily said. Her voice shook, but she kept it steady. I am trying to understand where I am. Lady Beatrice took one step closer. Then let me help you understand. The king is not a man you can fix with a soft voice and sad eyes. Whatever attention he gives you will not last. When the court grows tired of this little miracle, you will be sent away with nothing. A sudden hush fell across the courtyard. Emily did not need to turn around to know Adrian had arrived. The women knew it too. Their faces changed before she even heard his footsteps on the wet stone. Adrian stopped beside Emily, close enough that the warmth of him reached through the cold air. He did not look at her first. He looked at Lady Beatrice. You will apologize, he said. Lady Beatrice swallowed. Your Majesty, I only meant to protect the dignity of the crown. Adrian's silver-gray eyes did not soften. The dignity of the crown is not protected by humiliating someone who has done nothing wrong. Emily stared at the rain-dark stones beneath her shoes. No one had ever spoken for her like that. Not without asking for something in return. Adrian turned slightly toward her. Emily, he said, his voice lower now. Would you like to go inside? She looked up at him. The mist clung to his dark hair. His face was still guarded, still marked by years of distance and pain. But his hand remained at his side, open and empty. Waiting. Emily nodded. Yes. As they walked beneath the covered archway, she did not take his hand. Neither did he reach for hers. But for the first time in her life, Emily did not feel as though she was walking alone. Inside the palace, the warmth of the corridor did little to quiet the tremor in Emily's hands. She kept them folded beneath her shawl as Adrian led her past the tall windows, where evening had begun to gather over the gardens. The rain had stopped, but water still clung to the stone statues and bare branches outside, catching the last gray light. Neither of them spoke at first. The silence between them was not uncomfortable exactly. It felt careful, like both of them were holding something fragile and did not know where to set it down. At the end of the corridor, Adrian stopped beside a narrow door Emily had not noticed before. It was made of dark wood, plain except for a small silver handle. This is the library, he said. It is quieter than the dining hall. Emily looked at him. Are you avoiding dinner? A faint change touched his expression. Not quite a smile, but close enough that she saw what one might look like on him. Yes, he said. The council tends to speak more freely when there is soup in front of them. Emily followed him inside. The library was warmer than the rest of the palace, lit by lamps that cast soft gold across shelves that reached nearly to the ceiling. Books filled every wall. Some were old and leather-bound. Others had bright cloth covers faded by time. A fire crackled in the hearth, and two chairs sat near it with a small table between them. Emily paused just inside the door. I have never seen so many books. Adrian washed her face instead of the room. You like to read? When I can. She ran her fingertips lightly along the spine of a book near the door. The pack house had 3. One was a prayer book, one was a book of planting schedules, and one was missing half its pages. Then you will have better options here. He said it simply, as if offering someone a book was as ordinary as offering them tea. Emily turned toward him. Why are you being kind to me? The question hung in the quiet room. Adrian looked toward the fire. For several seconds, only the logs answered, shifting softly in the grate. I do not know how to be kind very well, he said at last. But I know what it looks like when people are not. Emily felt the truth of it settle between them. Before she could speak, a sharp sound echoed from somewhere deeper in the palace. It was not loud, but Adrian reacted as if it had struck him. His shoulders tightened. The lamps nearest the door flickered once. Then again. Emily saw his hand close around the back of the chair beside him. Adrian, she asked. He did not answer immediately. His eyes had gone distant, their silver color darkening at the edges. You should go to your room, he said. Now. The fire snapped. A cold draft moved through the library, though the windows were shut. Emily took one step closer, then stopped when she saw the strain in his face. Is it the curse? His jaw tightened. Mrs. Holloway will take you to the East Wing. But you are not well. Emily. Her name came out low and uneven. Not angry. Afraid. She had heard fear in other people before. It usually made them cruel. In Adrian, it made him step farther away from her. Please, he said, looking at the floor instead of her. Do not make this harder. Emily's heart beat faster, but she did not move toward the door. She remembered Mrs. Holloway's words. He had spent years making sure he never hurt anyone. She remembered the way he had stood between her and Lady Beatrice without asking for praise. She remembered how alone he had looked at the window that morning. I will not stay if you want me to leave, Emily said softly. But I will not pretend I do not see that you are hurting. Adrian closed his eyes. The lamps dimmed again. Somewhere in the palace, a clock began to strike the hour, each chime slow and heavy. When he opened his eyes, the silver in them had returned, but there was a sadness there that made Emily's chest ache. There is a room below this one, he said. It has a locked door. When the bells finish, I go there. Emily looked at the floorboards beneath her feet, imagining the hidden room below, the cold stone, the locked door, the king sitting alone while the palace waited for morning. Do you go alone? She asked. Adrian did not answer. He did not have to. The final bell rang through the library. The fire lowered. And in the silence that followed, Emily realized that the most frightening thing in Blackwood Palace was not the curse. It was how completely everyone had left him to face it by himself. Emily stood very still as the last echo of the clock faded through the library. Adrian had already turned toward the hidden door, his posture rigid beneath the black coat, as if every step away from her required more strength than he wanted her to see. The lamps around them flickered again. A thin line of frost appeared along the edge of the nearest window, delicate and white against the dark glass. Mrs. Holloway will come for you, he said. His voice had become quieter, almost distant. Go with her. Emily looked at the door behind him. It was not grand or frightening. It was only a narrow wooden door leading down into a place no one spoke about. Somehow, that made it worse. She imagined him behind it night after night, listening to the palace breathe above him while everyone else locked their doors and waited for morning. What happens down there? She asked. Adrian did not turn around. Nothing you need to worry about. That is not an answer. A shadow of surprise crossed his face. Perhaps no one had challenged him so gently before. He looked back at her, and for a moment the king disappeared beneath the exhaustion in his eyes. I lose control of things, he said. The lights, the temperature, sometimes the memories. His hand tightened at his side. I hear voices that are not there. I see rooms that no longer exist. I become someone I do not recognize. Emily's breath caught. There was no anger in the way he said it. Only shame. The kind that had been fed and watered for years until it grew larger than the person carrying it. And no one sits with you? She asked. Adrian gave a small, humorless smile. No one should. The library door opened behind them. Mrs. Holloway entered with a lantern in one hand and a folded blanket over her arm. Her eyes moved from Adrian to Emily, and the worry in them was immediate. Miss Carter, she said softly, it is time. Emily looked at the blanket. It was thick, blue wool, the kind someone might bring to a child during a storm. Is that for me? Mrs. Holloway nodded. The east wing can be chilly at night. Emily took it, but she did not leave. Adrian's gaze sharpened. Emily. She held the blanket against her chest. Her heart was beating hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. She was afraid. She did not want to pretend otherwise. The cold in the room was strange. The shadows around Adrian seemed to shift when he breathed. But fear had ruled too many of her choices already. It had taught her to stay silent when she should have spoken. It had taught her to leave people alone when they needed help, because helping them might bring trouble to her door. She could not do that again. I will not go downstairs with you, she said. I understand that you need space. Adrian's shoulders eased by the smallest amount. Thank you, but I would like to sit outside the door. Mrs. Holloway inhaled sharply. Adrian stared at Emily as if she had suggested standing in the middle of a thunderstorm. No, you said I could leave if I wanted to, Emily said. I do not want to leave. You do not understand what you are asking. Maybe not, she admitted. But I understand what it feels like when everyone decides you are too difficult to stay near. The words left her before she could soften them. Adrian went still. The frost on the window stopped spreading. Mrs. Holloway lowered her lantern, her face full of quiet sorrow. Emily swallowed and looked at the floor. You do not have to talk to me, she continued. You do not have to open the door. I will just sit there until you feel better. If you tell me to go, I will go. For several seconds, Adrian said nothing. Then he walked to the hidden door and rested his hand on the silver handle. 1 hour, he said without looking back. You stay outside for 1 hour, and then Mrs. Holloway takes you to bed. Emily nodded. 1 hour. The door opened onto a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Adrian stepped through, and the cold followed him down. Before he closed the door, he paused. Emily. Yes. His voice was almost too quiet to hear. Do not be afraid if you hear me. The door shut. Emily sat on the floor beside it, wrapped in the blue blanket, with Mrs. Holloway's lantern glowing at her feet. At first there was only silence. Then, from somewhere below, a low sound moved through the stone, not angry, not cruel, but lonely enough to make her eyes fill with tears. Emily placed her palm against the cold wood. I am here, she whispered. And beneath her hand, the darkness went quiet. The hour passed slowly, measured not by the clock above the library, but by the changing sounds beneath Emily's hand. At first, the room below remained filled with a cold, restless silence. Then came the faint scrape of a chair across stone. A sharp breath. The soft rattle of something glass against a table. Emily sat with her knees drawn beneath the blue blanket, her back against the wall, listening without trying to imagine too much. Mrs. Holloway had left a small tray beside her with tea and 2 butter cookies, but the tea had gone cold before Emily took a sip. Every few minutes, she spoke through the door. Not because she expected an answer, but because silence had been used as a punishment in her old home, and she did not want Adrian to mistake her quiet for abandonment. She told him about Noah and the stuck cart. She told him that the palace gardens would probably be beautiful when the rain finally stopped. She told him that she had found a book in the library about birds that traveled south before winter, and that she wanted to learn the names of every one. At first, nothing answered her. Then, after she mentioned the birds, a voice came from the other side of the door. The red ones are cardinals. Emily smiled into the dim hallway. You can hear me. Unfortunately. His voice was rough, but there was something almost dry in it. A small piece of humor, hidden beneath the strain. Emily leaned her head back against the wall. I was beginning to think you had fallen asleep. I do not sleep during these hours. Then perhaps you should. The silence that followed was different. Not empty. Thoughtful. The cold air around the door had softened enough that Emily could feel warmth returning to her fingertips. She looked down at the lantern. The flame had stopped trembling. What is the room like? She asked. Adrian did not answer right away. It was an old archive once. The king before my father kept maps there. Now it has a chair, a table, and locks. Emily's chest tightened. That sounds lonely. It is meant to be. Who decided that? His answer came quietly. I did. Emily closed her eyes. She understood why. If he believed he was dangerous, then locking himself away probably felt like the only decent thing left to do. But she also knew what happened when people spent too long believing they deserved to be alone. The thought became a room with no windows. Adrian, she said, you do not have to answer this if you do not want to. But when did it begin? The air behind the door changed. Not colder. Heavier. When I was 19, he said at last. My father died, and I became king before I knew how to be anything else. There was a winter sickness moving through the northern packs. I went to every village I could reach. I thought a king was supposed to carry everyone's fear so they would not have to. His voice paused. Something found me in those mountains. Something old. It did not take my life. It took my peace. Emily held the edge of the blanket tighter. And the council? They called it a curse. They told the kingdom I was unstable. They built this room and called it protection. Did they help you? The question was barely a whisper. Adrian gave a short breath that was not quite a laugh. They helped themselves. A clock chimed somewhere far above them. Emily realized the hour was over. Mrs. Holloway would return soon. She should stand. She should do what she promised. But before she could move, the lock on the other side of the door clicked. The sound was small, yet it made her heart stop. The door opened only a few inches. Adrian stood in the narrow gap, pale and exhausted, with shadows beneath his eyes and one hand still resting on the handle. He did not step closer. He did not look like a king at all. He looked like someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be seen without fear. You should go to bed, he said. Emily looked up at him from the floor. Are you better? Adrian's gaze dropped to her hand, still resting against the wood. I am quieter, he said. Then, after a pause that seemed to cost him something, he added, because you stayed. Emily did not rise immediately. She sat on the library floor with the blue blanket around her shoulders and looked at Adrian through the narrow opening of the door. The lantern beside her cast a warm circle of light across the stone, catching on the tired lines of his face. He seemed uncertain what to do with the silence after his confession, as if admitting that her presence had helped him was more dangerous than any storm that had passed through the palace. Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him that staying had not been difficult. She wanted to tell him that the hardest part had been realizing how long he had been left alone. Instead, she lifted the cold cup of tea from the tray and held it out toward him. It is probably terrible now, she said. Adrian looked at the cup, then at her. You saved it for me. I forgot to drink it. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. It was gone quickly, but Emily saw it. It changed him. Not completely. The shadows beneath his eyes remained, and the weight in his shoulders did not disappear. But for one brief second, he looked younger than the stories had made him. He opened the door a little farther and accepted the cup. Their fingers did not touch. Still, warmth moved through Emily's chest when he held it carefully, as if it were something precious. You should sleep, he said again. Mrs. Holloway will worry. She already worries, Emily replied. I think it is one of her talents. Adrian lowered his gaze to the tea. She has had many reasons to practice. The words made Emily quiet. She had noticed the way Mrs. Holloway watched him, the way her fear was always threaded with something gentler. Loyalty, perhaps, or grief. Before Emily could ask, footsteps sounded at the far end of the hallway. Mrs. Holloway appeared around the corner with another lantern, her gray uniform neat despite the late hour. She stopped when she saw the door open. Her eyes moved from Adrian to Emily, then softened with such deep relief that Emily almost looked away. Your Majesty, Mrs. Holloway said. Miss Carter. Adrian stepped back from the doorway. The cold that had filled the hallway was gone now. Not completely, but enough that the frost along the library windows had begun to melt into thin, clear drops. Mrs. Holloway noticed it too. Her hand tightened around the lantern handle. The east wing is ready, she said gently. Emily stood, her legs stiff from sitting on the floor. The blue blanket slipped from one shoulder, and Adrian reached out before it could fall. He caught the edge of it, then paused, as though he had forgotten he was holding it. Emily looked at his hand. The scars across his knuckles were pale in the lantern light. Slowly, carefully, he lifted the blanket back around her shoulders. His fingers never touched her skin. Good night, Emily, he said. The words were simple, but no one had ever said them to her, as if they meant more than an ending. Emily looked up at him. Good night, Adrian. Mrs. Holloway led her through the quiet palace, but Emily glanced back once before the corridor turned. Adrian was still standing in the library doorway, one hand resting against the dark wood. He watched her leave, not like a king guarding his distance, but like someone afraid that if he looked away, she might disappear. In the east wing, Emily found a small fire waiting in her room and a clean nightgown folded at the foot of the bed. She changed, brushed the rain-dried tangles from her hair, and climbed beneath the quilts. Yet sleep did not come. The palace was too quiet. The room was too warm. She kept thinking of the hidden room beneath the library and the way Adrian had said he was quieter because she stayed. At last, she slipped from bed and crossed to the window seat. The clouds had broken apart, revealing a thin strip of moonlight over the gardens. Far below, one light still burned in the library. Emily pressed her palm against the cool glass. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. She did not know whether the council would let her remain or whether the old fear inside Adrian would rise again. But she knew one thing with a certainty that made her heart ache. Somewhere beneath the same roof, a man everyone called a monster was awake because he had finally remembered what it felt like not to be alone. And in the quiet room above him, Emily made herself a promise. She would not let the palace turn his loneliness into a prison again. Morning came quietly to Blackwood Palace. The rain had passed in the night, leaving the gardens bright with drops of water that clung to every bare branch and iron gate. Sunlight spilled across Emily's room in pale gold strips, warming the quilt at her feet. For a few seconds, she lay still and listened. Somewhere below, a door closed. Somewhere farther away, someone laughed softly in the kitchen. The palace no longer sounded like a place holding its breath. Emily dressed in the soft green gown Mrs. Holloway had left for her and went downstairs before breakfast. She found the housekeeper in the West Hall, directing two servants as they carried fresh flowers toward the dining room. Mrs. Holloway looked surprised when Emily approached. "You are up early," she said. "I could not sleep," Emily admitted. Mrs. Holloway studied her face with gentle concern. "Is something wrong?" Emily looked toward the long corridor that led to the library. "I was wondering if the king is all right." The housekeeper's expression changed. Her gaze softened, but something cautious moved behind it. "He is in the council chamber," she said. "Lord Harrow called an emergency meeting at sunrise." Emily's stomach tightened. "About me?" "About many things," Mrs. Holloway replied. "But yes, about you too." Before Emily could ask another question, raised voices echoed from the far end of the hall. They were muffled by the heavy doors, but one voice carried clearly enough to make Mrs. Holloway go still. "Lord Harrow." Emily did not mean to move closer. Her feet simply carried her toward the sound. The council chamber doors stood slightly open. Inside, Adrian stood at the head of the long table, dressed in black from collar to boots. Sunlight from the high windows touched the silver in his eyes, but his face was unreadable. Lord Harrow faced him across the table, a stack of documents spread before him. "The court cannot ignore this," Harrow said. "The kingdom has seen the signs. The frost melted. The lights stabilized. You opened the lower room. They will believe the girl has some influence over the curse." Adrian's voice was calm. "She is not a tool." "No," Harrow said, "but she may be a solution." Emily felt cold despite the warmth of the hall. The word solution sounded too much like the word sacrifice. Adrian's hand rested flat against the table. "You will not speak of her as if she belongs to the council." "She belongs to no one," Harrow replied. "That is precisely the problem. She has no title, no family protection, and no understanding of what she has become involved in." Emily stepped into the doorway before fear could stop her. Every head turned. Adrian's expression changed at once. Not anger. Concern. "Emily," he said quietly. Lord Harrow's eyes narrowed. "This is a private meeting." "It is about me," Emily said. Her voice shook, but she did not retreat. "I think I should be allowed to hear it." The council members exchanged looks. Adrian came around the table and stopped beside her. He did not guide her away. He did not tell her to be quiet. He simply stood near enough that she knew she could leave if she wanted to. "They believe your presence may calm the curse," he said. "They want to study it, to decide how it can be used." Emily stared at the papers on the table. "Used?" Lord Harrow lifted one document. "There are old records of a bond between an Alpha King and a rare Omega bloodline. A bond that can stabilize the king's power and restore the crown." Emily's mouth went dry. "And what would that require?" No one answered. The silence was answer enough. Adrian's eyes hardened. "Nothing," he said. "It requires nothing from her." Lord Harrow's voice grew sharper. "Your Majesty, the Northern Pacts are restless. The crown has been weakened by your isolation. If this girl can help secure the kingdom, you have a duty to consider it." Adrian looked at Emily, and for the first time, she saw how much he was holding back. Not from the council, from himself. "I will not build my peace on her fear," he said. The words filled the chamber. Emily's eyes stung. She had spent so long believing that kindness was something people gave only when it cost them nothing. But Adrian was standing before his entire court, refusing the one thing they claimed could save him, because he would not take it from her. Lord Harrow gathered the papers with a tight, controlled motion. "Then you leave us with no choice," he said. Adrian's gaze did not move. "You have choices. You simply do not like the ones that require decency." Harrow turned toward the door, then paused beside Emily. "You should be careful, Miss Carter," he said softly. "A palace can make a person feel safe right before it teaches her what safety costs." He left before she could respond. The doors closed behind him. Emily stood in the bright, silent chamber with Adrian beside her. "What did he mean?" she asked. Adrian looked toward the window, where the palace gardens shone beneath the clearing sky. "It means," he said, "that someone is afraid of what happens if you are no longer afraid of me." Emily did not answer right away. The council chamber felt too bright after Lord Harrow's warning. Every beam of sunlight across the table sharp enough to show the dust floating in the air. Adrian stood beside her, silent, his attention fixed on the closed doors as if he could still hear the echo of Harrow's footsteps. Emily looked at the documents left behind, at the empty chairs where people had discussed her future as though she were a storm map or a locked gate. Then she lifted her eyes to Adrian. "I was afraid of you," she said. He turned toward her slowly. There was no surprise in his face, only a quiet sadness, as if he had expected nothing else. "I know. Not because I thought you would hurt me," Emily continued. Her fingers tightened around each other. "I was afraid because everyone kept telling me I should be." Adrian said nothing. Outside the high windows, a breeze moved through the gardens, stirring the wet branches until drops of water fell like scattered glass. Emily took a breath. "My whole life, people told me who I was before I had the chance to decide. Too weak, too quiet, too easy to give away. And when I came here, they told me who you were too." Adrian's silver-gray eyes held hers. "They were wrong about you. They were wrong about you too." The words settled between them. Adrian looked away first. His jaw tightened, and for a moment Emily thought he might leave the room. Instead, he walked to the window and placed his hand against the cold glass. "Being wrong about me could cost you," he said. "The council will not stop. Then we should not let them decide everything." Adrian gave a tired breath. "You should not have to fight my battles." Emily stepped closer, stopping a few feet behind him. "I am not fighting because you are king. I am fighting because I do not want anyone to use me again. And I do not want them to use you either." The silence that followed was gentle. It did not press against her chest. It gave her room to breathe. Adrian turned back toward her. The guarded distance in his face had not disappeared, but something had shifted beneath it. Trust, perhaps, small and uncertain, like the first green leaf after winter. "There is something you should know," he said. "The old records Harrow mentioned are real. Your mother's family came from the Moonvale line. They were healers once, long before the court decided gentleness had no place in a kingdom of wolves." Emily's breath caught. Her mother had died when Emily was young, leaving behind only a silver comb and a lullaby she used to hum when storms shook the cottage walls. No one had ever told Emily there was anything special in her blood. "Why did no one tell me?" she asked. Adrian's gaze darkened. "Because the council erased the records. They feared what a healer could do if she chose the truth over their control." A soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Holloway entered, her face pale beneath the morning light. "Your Majesty," she said, "there is a carriage at the south gate." Adrian's posture changed at once. "Whose carriage?" Mrs. Holloway looked toward Emily before answering. "Her stepfather's." Emily felt the room tilt. She could almost see him standing beyond the gates, his coat buttoned tight, his mouth set in that familiar line that meant someone would be blamed before the day was over. Adrian moved toward her, then stopped himself. "You do not have to see him," he said. Emily's heart beat hard, but beneath the fear was something new. Not courage exactly. Courage still felt too large for her. It was choice. "I do," she said. The south gate stood open beneath a clear sky. The rain had washed the stone road clean, and the palace banners stirred in the cool wind above the walls. Emily walked beside Adrian, with Mrs. Holloway a few steps behind them. Her stepfather waited near the carriage, dressed in his best brown coat, his eyes already searching her face. When he saw Adrian, he bowed too quickly. When he saw Emily standing upright beside him, His expression tightened. "Emily," he said, "come here." The old command moved through her like a ghost. For years, she would have obeyed before she even thought about it. But she did not move. Adrian did not speak. He simply stood beside her, quiet and steady, giving her the space to choose her own answer. Emily looked at the man who had measured her worth in chores and debts, then looked at the palace behind her. "My name is Emily Carter," she said. Her voice did not shake. "And I am not going with you." Her stepfather's face hardened. "You belong to the Carter pack." "No," Emily said. "I belonged to myself before I ever came here. I just did not know it." The wind lifted the edge of her green dress. Above them, the banners snapped once against the blue sky. Adrian's hand remained at his side, close but not touching. Emily did not need him to speak for her. She had found her own voice. Yet when she looked up, Adrian met her eyes with something warmer than gratitude and deeper than relief. "Then stay," he said softly. "Not as a cure, not as a promise. Stay because this is where you choose to be." Emily looked past him, toward the palace that had once frightened her, toward the hidden library, the quiet garden, the room where a lonely king had learned to open a door. She smiled through the tears in her eyes. "I choose to stay." And as the gates of Blackwood Palace closed behind the past she had finally left, Emily understood that destiny had not brought her there to save a king. It had brought her there so they could both learn what it meant to be free.